Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Strout, and I am the CEO of TAC Advisors. And today I'm joined by my co-founder, Al Hussein Madhani, who's our Chief Strategy Officer, former Chief of Staff, and a VP of Talent and People at a Silicon Valley startup. We're so excited to have you with us today to talk about case studies, which is the new norm in the interview process for the administrative profession. Before we jump into this topic, I just want to do a quick reminder for those of you who are joining us for the first time, and that is that we cannot see or hear you. Hopefully you can see and hear us though. So just in case, go ahead if you have any questions throughout this webinar, feel free to throw questions, Q&A in the chat, and we'll take a look at it and answer them throughout or at the end of the webinar. So awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Al. I think it's such an important topic because case studies are becoming more and more common for the administrative profession, not just for executive assistants, but chiefs of staff, operations managers, estate managers. They all look different. And for those people who are just starting to go back out into the world of interviewing, like this can be somewhat of a surprise and also seem sort of daunting as part of the interview process. And so that's why we wanted to cover this topic today, is just sort of break it down, show some case study examples, explain the why and what people are looking for in the interview process. So I appreciate you joining us today. So, I'm curious to hear from you, Al, as somebody who's been in the chief of staff and EA role. Have you ever had to complete a case study as part of your job? I know I did.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, not only is it, I think, more and more common, in fact, that 60% of executive assistants and chiefs of staff are being asked in our practice to provide case studies, but the more senior you become in your role, whether it's as just a chief of staff or an executive assistant or anything else, businesses actually demand, whether you're in engineering, product design, marketing, even finance, use real-time problem solving in the interview process, show a portfolio of work, and ensure sometimes you workshop live with the CEO a problem area, particularly if you're in the finance or people function, in order to see how you think and what problems you've experienced in the past that you've solved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know for me, gosh, it may have been me aging myself here, but like probably 8 or 9 years ago when I was initially interviewing for an executive assistant role, this is when I was working in hotels. What they had me do is create an email response to a potential guest or client who was having a problem at the hotel, because the position I was interviewing for was an EA to the general manager, and how I would respond and draft a response to that guest or client. And so I think you kind of make a good point of, why is this part of an interview practice? And it really is, kind of multifold. One, it's the closest way for an executive or a company to understand what your work style is. And the case study formats can be in a few different ways. They can be live, where you're actually working through a problem with an executive over like a course of 30 minutes or an hour. It can be something that they give you to take home and return it in a couple hours or in a couple of days. But it's the easiest way to replicate what an actual working situation with you will be like, because this role is so incredibly nuanced. Not every executive assistant position is the same. The needs and the demands of the EA and the executive are different. And so it's the easiest way to be able to sort of try before you buy, so to speak, without having to actually leave your current role or go work for the company and then potentially have to leave if it's not a good fit on either side. And so I think it's super important. And so I'm excited to talk about it today. And so let's talk about like a couple of the different formats of case studies, I think, first, and then we could talk about like digging in to make sure how your case study is a success. So as I mentioned, like there can be a few different formats. Sometimes they're timed. And so I've had execs where they will literally like jump on Zoom, give you a scenario, like a response to an email, and then you actually respond to it live on the Zoom, or a calendaring scenario where they say, like, here's our calendar, this important meeting came in, how would you shift my work day to fit this meeting in? What meetings would you change? How would you go about doing that? Like you said, I've had some stuff where it's a take home exercise. They give you a couple of days to complete it. There's also some of our clients that won't give you a time limit. And that in and of itself is a test because they want to see, how are you prioritizing this case study and doing it in tandem with your current role? How quickly are you going to get back to them? Are you going to ask questions or give them updates throughout the process? Like, if you do have a delay, sending them a message and saying, hey, I'm 2/3 of the way done. I had this and this going on, so I'll definitely get it to you by Friday at 5 p.m. Right? And
Yeah.
that in and of itself is an exercise, because things are constantly shifting and like happening throughout your workday anyway as an EA, and certain commitments you make or deadlines you make need to be shifted. And so how do you communicate that throughout the process too? So I thought that was something that's important to note.
Yeah, inevitably, it is a reflection of how you will work, and how you communicate. And so every part of the case study is important.
Mhm.
I think why don't we share, Megan, a little bit about how, like, some like baseline reasons or things that folks can do to ensure that their executive business partner, administrative professional, chief of staff case study is a success. So what's like the first thing that somebody should do to ensure that they're going to have a successful case study?
Yeah. I would say first, it reminds me of, remember when we were all in high school and we had to take the SAT, and that, like, there was, like, I don't know if it was an actual thing, but the sort of story was like, read the instructions, because if you don't read the instructions, I think it said, if you like put your name on the test, if you don't, you lose 250 points on your SAT. Do you remember hearing about
Yes,
that?
yes.
Okay. Read the instructions because you'd be surprised how many people overthink the case study and think they're supposed to do something more than what the case study says, right? So for example, we have a client, or had a client that we successfully made a search with earlier this year, and their case study was about planning an event, but it wasn't to actually plan the event. It was, here's the scenario. We're actually going to go through this scenario in a few minutes, of an event the exec wants to have planned coming up. And then the instructions were, what steps would you take to plan the event? What questions would you ask the executive? And what's the timeline for doing the tasks? And we did have somebody in the process who thought they had to actually plan the event, and they planned the whole event, but they missed the front end of the questions and the strategy. And that's really what the client was looking for. They wanted to know, what is the strategy behind what you're doing? Don't go plan the whole event. Like, that's like way too much time on the case study. And also, like, taking instructions, listening is a huge part of this role about being a great administrative professional. And so that's part of the test.
Yeah.
So take instructions literally, do what's being asked. If it says to put the presentation in a Google like slide format, put the presentation in a Google slide format. If it's saying to create a budget in Google Sheets, put the budget in Google Sheets. Like, whatever it's saying to do, actually do exactly what the instructions were saying.
Yeah, stay within the guidelines, the word count, the page count, match the font and color scheme with that of the company's ask, or the template, or the PowerPoint slide, or the Google Slides if necessary. Some other things you could do to ensure the case study is a success is get a second pair of eyes on it. A friend, a colleague, your recruiter, somebody that you trust. Of course, use technology like Grammarly,
Yes.
and spell check before sending.
Yep.
If valuable, throw it into Chat GPT, see what Chat GPT throws back as well.
Yeah.
But of course, don't, you should cite your source if in fact you do use something like Chat GPT.
Yeah.
Research the company, research their jargon,
Yeah.
research the products that they're selling, like what is their business.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm not saying to the point where you could become an expert, but
Yep.
understand how they make money. So you have that in your back, in the back of your head when thinking about, building out the answers to the case study.
Yeah.
Finally, details, details, details. Make sure your formatting is consistent, dates and times are written the same, periods or no periods at the end of bullets, things like that. Detail orientation is critical.
Yep.
And just, we should be super detail oriented, almost anally retentively so. And I because you are, what you produce is a reflection of your executive. And so think about it in those terms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other sort of single like point of failure, like out of all these things, right, we didn't really talk on is take the case study seriously. So I've had people who throughout the interview process are like, I've been doing this for 15 years, I've been doing it for 20 years, I've worked for amazing executives. Like that should be enough of a reflection of what I do as an executive assistant. And then they'll just sort of like kind of do bare minimum of the case study and send it over. And you have to remember that like part of the case, like part of the reason why people are implementing case studies as part of the interview process is some people are not good at interviewing, right? Like interviewing is a learned skill and not everybody has the gift of gab. And so this is your opportunity to level up in the interview process and crush the case study and give you an edge over other candidates. And so I have seen not even necessarily our candidates, but we work sometimes with clients who are running their own search in parallel. And they're like, have these, stellar EAs who have supported these amazing executives. And I'll be like, how are they doing in the interview process? And they say, they sent their case study over and it was really disappointing. Like, I don't know if they didn't take it seriously. I don't know if like I was really surprised because they had this whole history of being these incredible EAs and it was just not a stellar case study. And so they're putting so much weight into these case studies now. Really take it seriously, spend time focusing on it. And, this could really put you over the edge in the interview process against other candidates. So
Absolutely. It is the again, it is part and parcel of the entire interview, and particularly in this climate, it is a differentiator.
Yeah.
Right? So if there are two candidates for the same role, and one interviewed exceedingly well and one interviewed less well, but they're still pretty similar, the case study is a differentiator, and will be the tiebreaker potentially.
Yeah. The other way I look at it is, and this maybe because I like kind of grew up in the arts and theater and but it's like when you're going for an audition, what I learned when I was like going to like acting school, it's take every audition like as if you were going like to audition to go on Broadway. And so like do something to differentiate yourself, whether it's like a flower in your hair or, like a specific like outfit that you wear, whatever. Like you need to do something and take every audition seriously, like as if it's something you're, trying to get an Oscar for. And so that's how I look at every single interview process, every single step and every single stage, every person that you talk to, every email that you send, every case study that you do, like needs to be taken with the same level and weight of seriousness because everything throughout the interview process is important.
Yeah. Why don't we dive into some examples now of case studies that we've seen that have been given to administrative professionals, chiefs of staff, and executive assistants. And we'll go through kind of our thought process around them as well. Remember, if you are in a process now and they are not asking you for a case study, one thing you could do is you could actually recommend to the CEO, to the recruiter, hey, would you like me to do a case study as part of the process? Again, that's a way to differentiate yourself from the other candidates. And here's some examples that we're going to show of some of the examples that you could come to the table with.
Yeah, actually, like I want to emphasize that for a second, because like I said, about 60% of the people we work with do require a case study, but that doesn't mean throughout the interview process, if you're part of it and they don't, you shouldn't bring examples to the table. So if you're in a physical in-person interview, bring like bring your laptop with you, or actual examples of like an itinerary you planned for an offsite, or a budget you put together, or a deck that you created and edited. Like, you can always bring samples of work with you through the interview process, or like a sample schedule that you created, because the best indicator of future success is past performance. And so that's and thanks for sharing that out, Jose. That was a good thing to double click on.
Yeah,
So
that's right. It becomes your portfolio of work.
right.
It becomes your portfolio of work. And so it's something that you can showcase.
Yeah. Okay, so this is one scenario. One thing to note is the case study examples we're going through today are pretty EA focused. We could literally spend hours upon hours going through the different types of case studies that we have seen our clients do over the years, like for chiefs of staff or estate managers. But the ones we're going to go over today are ones that are mostly for executive assistants. If you have questions or you want to talk through chief of staff or operations managers or office manager ones, feel free to ping us separately. But hopefully you guys can see. So this first example is an itinerary. So your executive has asked you to plan a multi-country business development trip next month. They're traveling to London, Istanbul, Dubai, and Hong Kong. While in London and Hong Kong, they need to stop into our offices to meet with our team members, as it's been over 6 months since their last visit. They want to depart on Sunday night and be back by Friday, so they have the weekend with their family. Create an itinerary, including briefing docs you would use to prepare your executives for their meetings. Highlight the steps you would take to ensure a successful trip, and outline your assumptions. So there's a lot of good content here and things I think that are worth highlighting. What are some of the initial things that stand out to you, Alizane, of what they did share that should be like kind of big green flags that you need to take into consideration?
Absolutely. So initially, just right off the bat, beyond the basics, you got to start thinking about the following. Think through contingencies. What is the purpose of the trip? Right? You've got information here in the case study that says it's both internal facing, but also business development, which means external facing, potential client facing. What internal meetings do the executives already have on their calendars that they cannot miss? Sometimes it's maybe a meeting with the board, it may be a meeting with their executive team, it may be an all hands that they always speak at. Are there personal commitments over these dates that you need to accommodate? So you need to be asking those questions in advance before writing out the case study. For example, if it's the last couple of weeks of August, that's usually before school start, and when a lot of families take vacations, if this executive has children. Similarly, if it's the last week of a particular month, it could be the last day of a quarter. And if it's a business that relies on a fiscal calendar that sells perhaps like SaaS software as a service, it's enterprise software, you need to understand when the end of the quarter is, because that is a critical date internally for the company for sales deals. And sometimes the CEO and executives need to be available for sealing the deal on final sales calls. So these are the kind of questions to ask. If this executive has passports and international presence already, ask them if they've got family in those cities that they would like to visit when they are visit while they're in those cities. And you should always keep a list of contacts of people that they should be meeting should something get canceled from their calendar. So there should be like people that you list A of like everybody you need to meet, and then tier B, second list of people that you could have coffee with, press flesh, have a handshake, potential business opportunity, potential, family obligation of people that you want to meet in case something gets canceled and they've got extra time in the city. Of course, that could be a list of contacts of clients as well as family members. And in this economic climate, again, a way to differentiate yourself from other candidates is ask the hard questions. Recognize that, look, this company may have just gone through a reduction in force. They may have just had layoffs. So don't assume that the executive is flying business class, because optically that may not look good, given that they just laid off 30, 40, 100 people, and yet now they're spending $20,000 on a business class flight, right? So ask those kind of questions as well, like what class are they going to fly? Don't just assume, especially in this macroeconomic environment. Of course, there's travel accommodations that we need to consider and travel requirements. Megan, why don't you go through a little bit of those?
Yeah, of course. So kind of the same thing you mentioned about like considering the macroeconomic climate, right? So maybe the exec typically stays in five-star properties, but because of recent layoffs and they want to be more considerate of what's going on, offering them the option to either stay at a hotel or stay at an Airbnb, right? Like giving different tiers of options based on price point. And then also, asking the questions around like what is somebody's lifestyle. So do you happen to know your exec is an absolute disaster if they don't work out every morning? Okay, great. So then we need to make sure wherever they're staying, there's a fitness center, right? Or like is in proximity to whatever type of fitness activity they like to do. Does your exec have a very specific diet? If so, do you need to have a fridge or a kitchen wherever it is that they're staying so that you can arrange to have in advance like specific food or specific, cooking materials in their room? Do they need a specific amount of time to sleep every day, right? That's going to affect the time of your flights, the time you start meetings. So all of these are considerations that you're going to input into the itinerary so that you can show and reflect, these items. One thing I do want to make a note of, so like in this case, this is saying, create an itinerary with briefing docs. So typically speaking, what you would do is you would create an itinerary. You're going to like make these assumptions, build it out, and then you're going to actually outline after the fact, like what are the assumptions you made. And so, because they do want you to actually like pick a flight, pick hotels, create an itinerary, put buffer space in between, travel times in between meetings, like they want you to create it. But then at the end, you'd say, I'm making the assumption that this exec likes to fly business class, wants to do a red eye on a Sunday so they can get there on Monday, that and like likes these specific lay down seats, that they want to stay in a hotel versus an Airbnb because they always just eat out anyway. Having a kitchen isn't important, right? So you list these things out, but that's how you're going to describe like these considerations that you make, right? What are some
That's
other
right.
things, Al, like about travel requirements or just things people need to outline and consider?
Yeah, of course, got to ask about the passports and visas, quarantine protocols. In some countries, COVID isn't over. Testing protocols, having a translator or an app on their phone that translates so they can at least, say common phrases in the native language. And of course, sometimes even security. Sometimes some parts of the world, security detail is required, particularly in South America and other cities. And so ask those questions if they normally do travel with security. Of course, material prep is also important. So when I talk about material prep, ask questions about, or actually write out a packing list, right? Mm-hmm. By thinking about what the weather's going to be. Sometimes if they are staying in, say, a Courtyard Marriott, there's not going to be an umbrella. Whereas if they stay at the Ritz, there will be an umbrella at concierge, right? So understand, and if it is raining in Hong Kong, so understand, particularly if they're walking to meetings, what the weather is going to be like, create a packing list, research any materials or presentations that need to be ready before they arrive. Part of that is the briefing, right? So, it asks actually in the travel itinerary case study to include briefing docs. Well, who are you going to receive those docs from? You're not going to write them yourself necessarily, but you need to communicate in the case study that you will sync with the chief revenue officer or head of sales to understand client needs and, get a one-page summary with a photo of the person that they're meeting and a summary of like maybe a link to their LinkedIn and summary of the deal. Like, where's the deal right now? Is it a qualified deal? Is it the last stage of the deal? Have we already signed the deal? We're trying to get a renewal contract. Like, where are we on the deal? To make sure that they are briefed in advance so they can read that on the plane on the way over. And of course, part of that is also making sure that it's available on their iPad and other devices. Finally, a couple of other things around material prep is never forget the health insurance card, right? And never forget the travel insurance, right? Particularly for executives, ask the question, do we have, um, international emergency travel insurance, right? In case something happens, they get sick or whatever, ask those questions to make sure that they are traveling with that information, or that you as the executive assistant and that you as the executive assistant have that information at all times. And what is the emergency protocol should something happen to them internationally? And so just understanding the asking these questions will really showcase the depth of your strategic thinking around accommodating every single thing that could possibly go wrong, so that they have a seamless and productive trip.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, kind of depending on the format of this, right? So you might put this in, a Google Doc, it's an itinerary. Maybe you normally put it all on the exec's calendar. So if I've seen candidates do the itinerary in like a Google Sheet or Google Doc, and then actually like make a mock calendar on their own personal Google Calendar with what it would look like, right? So like you can take this as far as you want, because some people are visual and actually show like flight time is arriving and how that would look like in a calendar invite, commute time, hotel like arrival. So, you can get creative in that way to do snapshots of exactly what you would do. But yeah, so just wanted to like kind of outline that in regards to those considerations. So
That's
I think
right. And as a follow-on to that, one thing, particularly if folks are traveling to China or sometimes the Middle East, ask about VPN. Should the CEO or the executive need VPN on their phone and their devices so that they can actually access the internet? And some systems are blocked in some of these countries. So make sure that you research that in advance. For example, the best way to communicate in the Middle East, in Dubai, is through WhatsApp, not through iMessage, if your executive is using an iPhone. Make sure they've got WhatsApp downloaded on their phone, and you've got that means of communicating to them and the other team members. Similarly, in Hong Kong, if they go outside of Hong Kong to mainland China, there is a high likelihood that Google Gmail won't work. So make sure that you have printed out the itinerary, unless they don't have, especially if they don't have a VPN to access the Google server internationally. The last thing I'd say about travel is the sequence matters. So some countries, you're not allowed into other countries based on where you were before on your passport, right? Particularly in the Middle East, around between a lot of Arab countries and Israel. So understand if Tel Aviv is a destination, or other city in Israel, understand the sequence and make sure that they've got 2 passports or extra papers to ensure that they can go seamlessly between Middle Eastern countries and Israel.
Yeah, awesome. Great point. Okay, cool. So let's look at the next one. All right, scheduling and communication. So in this particular one, they're giving you a scenario where your executive receives an email from one of your board members at 2 p.m. PST stating the following: Sam, are you free tomorrow at 7 a.m. to discuss next week's board meeting? It's Taylor. Super descriptive. Taylor is based in New York City and Sam is based in San Francisco, but currently in Seattle on a work trip. What steps do you take to respond to Taylor? All right, so what are some of like the green flags or important pieces of information here that like immediately stand out to you all?
Yeah, so right off the bat, this is a board member, right? And you should, by the way, know all board members and have access to their executive assistants. That's the first thing that you should be asking for when you join as the EA to the CEO or very high functioning executive business partner or chief of staff. And so right off the bat, you should flag the email to your executive, right? Because it may be the case that they don't have context. Obviously, they probably do, right? And make sure that they're communicating what that context may be to you so that you can prioritize it correctly. Because sometimes executives don't want to talk to their board members, right? And it's your job to say no without it showing like the executive doesn't want to talk to them, right? So understand the tone with which you need to respond to the board member, and whether or not you should even respond to the board member. Because remember, the board members also have assistants, and you may not have all the context with what's going on behind the scenes. So it's always good to check in with your executive. Of course, now, Megan, if they're going to reply to the board member,
yeah,
the executive, like their executive has said, yes, please reply to the board member and like, let's get this thing scheduled. What are some of the clarifying questions they should be asking the board member in a response?
yeah. So again, assuming that you pinged your exec text, Telegram, Slack, and they're like, I have no idea why Taylor is asking to meet with me. So yeah, please find out and get them on my calendar. The first thing that's a sort of a red flag to me is it's 2 p.m. our time. They're on the East Coast, so it's 5 p.m. So it's like end-ish of business day, and they're asking for a 7 a.m. call tomorrow. But they didn't clarify, is it 7 a.m. EST? Is it 7 a.m. PST? I know for me, because I have clients on both coasts, I usually, when I ask for a time to meet with them on their time zone because I'm considerate, but like not everybody thinks that way, right? And so the first thing I would do is clarify the time zone. I'd also clarify the purpose of the meeting. Like, we know it's for the board meeting, but is it to run through the decks or the pre-reads to clarify some stuff before they walk into the board meeting? Like, what specifically do they want to go over? Because maybe there's additional materials that we can give Sam to prepare, right? Or, additional information that we need to pull for Sam going into the meeting. Also clarifying, like, do they want it to be a phone call? Do they want it to be a Zoom? How do they want to get a hold of them? How long do they need? Is this a 15-minute call, or is it like an hour of going through the whole deck together, right? And so asking again the purpose, the amount of time is super important. Asking is it just going to be the two of them on the call, or is there anybody else that they need to have present? Maybe it's something that is like a deep dive on the financials that they need help with on the pre-read. Maybe you need to also grab the CFO, right? And then also clarify once maybe at the end of the email, do you want me to work with your EA to get this on your calendar, right? Like, maybe they just forgot to copy their EA on the calendar or the email invitation. And so asking that. Now, you may know, or you may have context that this board member is in between EAs right now or doesn't have an EA at all. And so if you have that context, great. But that's more or less how I would do it. So my response in this email would be, hi Taylor, it's thanks so much for reaching out. It's great to hear from you. Just to clarify, would you like to speak to Sam tomorrow at 7 a.m. EST or PST? They're currently in Seattle on a work trip, and I'd love to try to squeeze them in. Is your timing also flexible in case it doesn't work with their calendar? Let me know if there's any additional materials that you need him to review in advance of the call, and the deeper purpose of the meeting for this board conversation. And if you'd like it to be, a phone, a Zoom, and for how long, something like that, like quick and short and to the point. Let me know how I can best assist. Megan.
Yeah, and maybe even throw in something like should I work with your assistant, Fatima, who I've worked with in the past, or I noticed you didn't copy her on the email, right? So just because maybe they did that on purpose, right? So the last thing I'd say about scheduling communication and how you respond is, irrespective of their communication to you, if they use abbreviations, if they have spelling errors, if they are short and use like LOL and THX for thanks, your communication back should be highly professional, and it should be at least a few registers above theirs. So don't presume that you have the opportunity to communicate in the same way they're communicating with you. So always keep the communication highbrow, and don't assume that you can lower your register, but keep it very highbrow. Use Grammarly, the spell check, and the grammar check.
Yeah, we literally should get a sponsorship from Grammarly. I'm like the biggest Grammarly. I like run everything through Grammarly. If you don't have Grammarly, you need to download it on your computer right now. Okay, great. All right, second to last one. All right, so event planning. So you're given this prompt. It's August 15th and the annual planning season is approaching. The CEO asked you to plan an in-person offsite for the leadership team to take place at the end of September. The CEO has asked you to own logistics and budget for the event. The CEO is out of office and offline from August 27th to September 3rd. Outline your approach to how you would tackle this assignment. What questions would you ask the CEO and ELT to plan the event successfully? What steps would you take to plan the event and timeline for each task? So, off the bat, what are some of the green flags or considerations from this prompt that you would take note of?
Yeah, so right off the bat, you need to understand from your executive, what is the purpose of the event? Like, what is the goal? Like, what do you want the team to walk away with at the end of the event? Is it bonding? Is it reviewing the financial plan? Is it, a lot of change management? Like, is it fun? Is it games? Is it work? Is it a half-half? Is it not? Can you influence that in any way, perhaps? And can you, because that actually will determine how you build out an agenda. Now, what a lot of executive assistants don't do is they don't look historically at the previous offsites. That's something I would ask that you do in this one and say, well, where have they gone before? Is there something that they'd like to do again? Oh, that one hotel over there was great. We should just do that again. Or let's never go here again, right? So you know that in advance. So you have, because some of that's historically on their calendar, but you really push the question and ask those questions in advance, especially if there's feedback from previous offsites. Megan, what would you do around process for planning it, like venues and other details that you'd want to include in your answer?
Well, yeah, I think the first thing, so the biggest sort of glaring thing with this scenario is that it's August 15th and they want an event by the end of September. So we're talking about like at max 6 weeks to plan this, right? And part of this assignment is around timeline. And the CEO is offline for approximately a week and like in a week and a half from this ask date. So there's going to be stuff that has to happen to not be a blocker once the CEO goes out. So like you said, that initial conversation with the exec to understand their goal for the offsite and their vision, right? That vision is important. It's not only just what content is going to be in it, but do they want this to be in a city? Do they want this to be like a hybrid retreat where they're like in intensive meetings for half the day, but then they go and do like an ayahuasca ceremony or something? I mean, I've seen in all kinds of interesting stuff in this job, right? Or they like, go on a hike, right? And so then you need something that's more in nature. So you need to have that conversation real quick, if not like immediately when they ask. If they ask it when you're live in front of them, that's easy because it can ask those follow-up questions to them about like, what's the vision? How much time do you want to be physically in meetings versus having free time or bonding time with the execs? How many days do you envision or want it to be? What's the budget for this? How much of this do you want? Like, do you want this to be like AV requirements? Like, are you hoping people do presentations, or is it going to be much more like collaborative and just working around each other, right? So that's going to give you the infrastructure you need to then say, okay, this needs to be in a city, or this can be in a very remote location. So then from there, you can work over the next week before the exec goes out and shortlist cities, locations, take into consideration, is everybody based in one city? Like, is this a primarily in-person working company? Because if everybody lives in San Francisco, that San Francisco is a really easy airport to go in and out of. And there's a ton of awesome places in driving distance from San Francisco that you can do a retreat. Whereas if you have people spread all over the country or all over the world, now you have to put into consideration travel time, flights, once you physically get to the location you're going to be, proximity of the airport to whatever the location is. Some places take an hour or two to even get out of a city to get to a remote destination. And so all of that is going to cut into the time for you to actually have your offsite. And so you're going to have about like a week and a half to shortlist 2 to 3 venues based off of the stuff that you and the CEO agreed to, that's in budget, and put together a proposal, because then you need to have that meeting with the exec before they go out on the 27th to have them confirm which location they want, so that you can then, while they're out, start booking everything, right? And so that timeline is going to be really, really tight, and you're going to have to like really prioritize and be on the move for this.
Yeah. And so part of that means, like, do you need breakout rooms in the venue for private meetings between 2 or 3 ELT members? Or is it just going to be one big room, right? You should think through AVDC logistics, right? Everything from VPN to Wi-Fi to, like, is anybody going to be zooming in? What does that look like? Anybody be sharing their screen? Probably. So get that prepared. And most importantly, is there an expectation that every ELT member will be physically present? And if so, given that it's August 15th and it's literally 6 weeks away, maybe 5, you should probably put it on their calendars now.
Yeah.
Because August 15th,
block it out.
Yeah, August 15th to like Labor Day, like to first week of September is school. It's like a lot of people travel for their kids' schools, whether they're college or high school. So there's that transition period. And so they need to know, so they can talk to their spouses as well, to just confirm that they will be at this offsite for a certain number of days, particularly if there's travel involved. So you got to get it on their calendars so they can commit. And we should be tracking their commitment level by working with their EAs, or also they themselves directly. Because it's one of those things you'll put on their calendar, but they may not confirm their attendance for some time. You got to get ahead of it.
No, yeah. Now, another thing to flag is the time of the year, kind of like you said too, like, is it close to end of quarter? What other things are going on? Like, do execs have any other commitments or meetings they have to be in? But then also this time of the year, depending on where you live and they want to hold this offsite, it's fire season in Northern California. It's hurricane season in Florida. Like, right. And so what if your exec's like, I want to do this in Orlando, Florida. I love Mickey Mouse. Like, I want to be able to go to Disney World. So now you have the consideration of like, what's the backup plan if there's a hurricane?
Yeah.
Right. And so you got to take things like that into effect. If they're like really adamant that it's still going to be Orlando, even in hurricane season, cool. Make sure you check with the hotels if they have backup generators. You'd be shocked. And when I worked at Four Seasons Palm Beach, we had a backup generator. Another hotel down the road did not. And we started having guests walking over and coming to stay at our hotel because the other hotel was out of power. Right. And so there's like things like that you have to consider. Another
Absolutely.
thing, yeah. Another thing you have to consider too is timeline. So do they want like special swag or gifts for the execs? Because if they want like specific branded stuff, that takes time again to turn around. So you're going to need to work on that pretty quickly. You may want to survey the leadership team right in the beginning to see what else they would like to have included. So getting that survey out pretty quick so that you can factor that in. And then once you have sort of all of that information, the second 3 to 4 weeks is going to be about communication, sending out comms to the team on what to expect, what they need to have prepared, gathering materials for presentations in advance and final approval, sending out a packing list. Again, kind of going back to like treat this like any other travel trip, like what all the things we talked about before with the itinerary, make sure that all of those accommodations are being met. Anything else, Al, that I missed?
I mean, one thing that you should always think about is, making sure that you've got COVID tests available on site. You don't know people's sensitivity around that. and make sure that um, you communicate with the hotel or the venue around dietary restrictions. And especially as you get nearer to the event, there may be some attrition. Some people may not join, wondering if you can make those adjustments to the food and beverage orders, especially to manage the spend in this macro environment. And of course, after the event, always take a survey and collect the data for how the event went, what went well, what did not go well. You should even ask if you will be joining. Because what most executives don't realize is how much support they need, oftentimes on site in the event. And so you should also ask that question too, to ensure that you have prepared. And if you do, then you should, of course, go maybe a day in advance and leave, you should be the first one there and the last one out to make sure everything is solidified in that regard.
Yeah, amazing. All right. I think we covered just about everything. Anything that I missed or you think that is important, Al Hussein, to?
I mean, the last thing is for this event is like people want an agenda. Like it's okay, like 6 weeks out to like put a block of time. But as you get nearer, you're going to need an agenda. So you and the CEO or the executive need to work on the agenda. And it may be a draft that you draft first that he works with you on, or based on the goals of the event, particularly if it's going to be facilitated by an outside person, if there's going to be some fun stuff, some not, some work stuff. And you should build out an agenda. One thing I would highlight here is that the best offsites I've ever been at, no matter the company, no matter the size, always include in the week working time.
Yeah.
Right? Like at least a couple hour block. And I don't mean lunch. I mean like a 2 hour block to just for executives to check their email, put out fires back home so that they can be fully present then in the meeting.
Yep.
And so that would be something to differentiate yourself from other candidates by making that suggestion up front. Because no matter where you are in the stack of a leader in the SLT, the senior leadership team or the executive leadership team, you're always getting pinged, Slack, emails, et cetera, customers, clients, internal, external, and your stuff that you got to deal with on a day. And better that it not happen during lunch, better that you not excuse yourself from the meeting to take care of stuff and you book it well in advance. So you should be, as an executive assistant, very forward with your executive about demanding that.
Amazing. I agree. I know when we did it recently for our offsite, it was so helpful, and that having that downtime to get done with all those important things really made the time together to be present so much more impactful.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, great. Thank you so much, Al Hussein. I really appreciate you doing this for us and for all of you who joined us. I hope this was helpful. If you have any other questions, of course, we're going to send this out for those of you who joined us, the recording, and it also is going to be put up on our YouTube channel. So feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues who may find this information useful. And otherwise, have a wonderful day.